Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video we've got a couple of things to discuss, including a couple signings for a couple of goaltenders, an extension, and a new contract for one of the UFA goalies, a couple of updates on the buyout rumors, plus some RFAs possibly signing in the not distant future. And we've also got some trade rumors involving the Capitals, the Sharks, the Canadiens, and the Calgary Flames. So we'll get to all of that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the Internet Hockey Channel. Now, as usual, I'll kick things off today with the signing update that has happened. Once again, we had a big signing over the weekend in my video that I posted a couple of days ago, where the Arizona Coyotes signed Matt Dumba to a 1-year, $3.9 million deal. So, took the biggest defenseman off the UFA market. So good to see that the Dumbo finally got signed, and good to see that he was going to the Coyotes. But there was a couple of other signings that happened over the weekend that did have some pretty good significance to them. First, for the Philadelphia Flyers, they signed goaltender Samuel Ersson, who is signed for this year, to a 2-year contract extension with a $1.45 million AAV, and the deal will begin the start of next season. So this is a pretty good deal in my opinion. Now for this year, Ersson may not make the NHL roster. The Flyers have an abundance of goaltenders. Last year, Ersson was basically a third stringer in that system, with Sandstrom being waivers eligible. The Flyers didn't put him on waivers, so they had him as the backup for most of the time, and they had Carter Hart as the starter. So Ersson was basically a third stringer, but there was some injuries for the Flyers in the net last year, and he did get into some games. He was able to get into 12 NHL games last year, putting up a 3.07 goals against average and an 8.99 save percentage. And he also got into 42 AHL games, putting up a 2.84 goals against average and a 900 save percentage. So he looks good. I know the Flyers last year seemed to be really high on Ersson as possibly being the goalie of the future for this franchise. And that's where some of the talk where a possible Carter Hart trade came from. As with Hart's contract nearing his end and Ersson being a player the Flyers are really high on, a lot of people thought that if Hart was moved, Ersson would be the goalie of the future for the Flyers. So I definitely still think that's likely. But for the time being, I'm not sure if he makes the NHL roster. If you look at the Flyers, they have Felix Sandstrom, they have Cal Peterson, they have Sam Ersson, who I don't think is waivers eligible right now. They have Carter Hart. So they have 4 quality goaltenders on that team, possibly 5. Ivan Fedotov does wind up playing in the NHL this year. So they have a lot of good NHL goaltenders. So I definitely think it's quite likely that Hart's going to be a starter for the time being, with maybe Peterson or Fedotov being the backup. Maybe they risk putting Sandstrom on waivers. I think Ersson's at the point probably going to play in the AHL at this point. So it's going to be interesting to see. But the Flyers have an abundance of goaltenders. So it would not surprise me at all if they were to consider possibly moving one. I'm not sure if they could maybe move a guy like Felix Sandstrom, or maybe they do try and wind up trading Carter Hart. But it's definitely interesting to see. But I think Ersson, long-term, could be the goalie of the future for the Flyers. And I think as early as next year, Ersson could be, at the very least, a backup for the Flyers. And then in a couple of years' time, Ersson, I think, could definitely be the starter for Philadelphia. So a really good extension, in my opinion. And Ersson's going to be a fantastic NHL goaltender for the Flyers for years to come. And the other sign that I want to get to here today was also another goaltender that got extended. And that is the Anaheim Ducks extending goaltender Alex Stalock to a 1-year, one-way deal with an AAV of $800,000. Now, Stalock with UFA, he played last year with the Chicago Blackhawks. Actually did quite well as the Hawks backup last year. After dealing with some health problems over the past couple of years, he finally was able to get into a consistent NHL role last year with the Hawks, was able to stay healthy. He got into 27 games with Chicago last year, putting up a 908 save percentage and a 3.01 goals against average, which was actually really good for a bad Blackhawks team. So he actually showed that he can be a really good backup. Now, in the current system with the Anaheim Ducks, I don't think Stalock makes the NHL roster, just given the fact that the Ducks still have John Gibson as their starter, and they have Lucas Ostell as their 1B basically in net. So they have 2 really good caliber NHL goaltenders. So at this point, I would say Stalock's the third stringer. But there has been still a lot of talk that John Gibson could be moved by the Anaheim Ducks. So if he does wind up getting moved by Anaheim before the season starts or early in the season, they have some insurance in net, as I think they could definitely work with a Dostal-Stalock tandem if they do wind up moving on from Gibson. So it's going to be interesting to see, but I definitely think that's a very likely option for the Ducks, is they possibly put Stalock on waivers, send him down to the minors, have him as their third stringer to start the season, and if Gibson does wind up being moved, they could definitely have a Dostal-Stalock tandem. So it's not a huge signing, but it does give them some goaltending insurance and depth right now, and it could be a really good move if they do move Gibson down the road. So going to be interesting to see, but that's another one of the free agent goalies off the market. So still a lot of good free agents out there, such as forwards Thomas Tatar, Tyler Mott, Josh Bailey, Pius Suter, defensemen like Caleb Jones, Ethan Bear, and goaltenders like Martin Jones. So there's still a ton of really good forwards out there, defensemen and goaltenders on the UFA market. So I think hopefully now that some of these other moves have happened, we'll start to see a little bit of free agency pickup. And hopefully some of these guys who don't have NHL contracts right now will get NHL contracts in the not-too-distant future. So going to be interesting to see. Going over to some of the RFA business that could be happening in the not-too-distant future. We talked about how there were 14 RFAs left, I think last Thursday. No RFAs have signed since then, if I'm correct. But Elliot Friedman on that NHL Network hit last week did say a couple of things about a couple of RFAs that could get done in the not-too-distant future. For Trevor Zegras, he said the reason why Zegras doesn't have a contract at this point in time is because they wanted to get Terry's done first. Terry had arbitration. Terry was going to possibly go through arbitration, only take a 1 or 2 year deal. So the Ducks really wanted to get that one done first. So they ended up signing Terry to 7x7 right before his arbitration hearing. So that was good. And now it seems like they've shifted their attention to Zegras. So hopefully a deal shouldn't take too long to come into place. Zegras is a really key piece of that Ducks team and probably one of the top players on that team going forward in their future. So hopefully they can sign him to a long-term deal. I know some people think that maybe they'll have Terry as like the ceiling for all the players that they're going to sign, and that they don't want to sign anyone else at this point in time higher than $7 million. So maybe Zegras signs a bridge deal of like maybe 3 years, 2 years at like $5-6 million. I think that's a possibility, but I think they would rather go long term, maybe like a 7-8 year deal, right around like $7.5-8.5 million AAV. So hopefully they're able to get Zegras signed, but it does sound like they want to get Terry done first. He had arbitration rights and stuff like that. So once the Terry was done, now it seems that they shifted their focus to Zegras, and I expect that after Zegras' extension is done and they have him locked up long term or short term, whatever it is, I expect them to definitely try and continue talks with Jamie Drysdale, who's another big piece of that team, probably their top defenseman long term, and someone else who's still in need of a new contract. So hopefully after they get Zegras done, they get Drysdale done, and then they can start moving forward with their team. As for the Edmonton Oilers, they still have one big RFA left on that team, and that is Evan Bouchard. Bouchard's a really big piece of that Edmonton Oilers blue line. He's a really productive offensive defenseman. The team had confidence in moving Barrie because Bouchard was such a really good, dynamic offensive playmaker. So getting him signed for a new deal is going to be important. Elliot Friedman did say that he expected that contract to probably be the one that's done in the not-too-distant future. He said that was the one that he was most confident would get done in the next maybe couple of weeks, maybe a couple of days, maybe sometime this week it gets done. But he says he expects it to be somewhere around a 2-year deal, around the $4 million mark. So it'll be interesting to see. I know the Oilers currently have around $3.5 million left in cap space. So if they were to sign up to somewhere around a $4 million deal, I think it's quite likely that they may have to make a corresponding move, whether that be sending down a forward before the season starts, as they're currently listed having 13 forwards, or possibly making a subsequent trade before the season starts. But it's very likely that the Oilers may wind up signing Bouchard in the not-too-distant future to somewhere around like a 1 or 2 year deal, around a $4 million AAV. So it's going to be interesting to see, but it sounds like Bouchard with Edmonton and Zegras with Anaheim could get in the not-too-distant future, maybe in the next couple of days, maybe within the week, maybe 2 weeks, but it seems like those two deals will be getting done in the not-too-distant future. So hopefully those two deals can get done in the not-too-distant future, and both the Ducks and the Oilers can go forward with the rest of their business before the season starts. Going over to the buyout update part of the video, there's now going to be no more buyouts. So, like we said, Arizona's buyout window ended Friday. They did not buy out anyone. Minnesota's buyout window ended Saturday. They did not buy out anyone. The Rangers, Bruins, and Oilers buyout windows ended Sunday. They did not buy out anyone. And the Penguins and Ducks buyout windows ended Monday, and they did not buy out anyone. So all of the teams who had an opportunity to use their buyout window all didn't. And with all of the arbitration cases done, no team now will have a buyout window. So all the buyouts for this season are now over. We'll have to wait until next season to see any of buyouts. Once again, it'll be mid-June to right before the free agents starts. That'll be the first buyout window, and then teams will have a second buyout window after arbitration dates. But for this year and the time being, there'll be no more buyout windows. So quite surprising that not all of those teams that had the opportunity to use the buyout window didn't. Like I said, I wasn't quite shocked that most of those teams didn't use their buyout window. Like I said, I didn't think Edmonton would use their buyout window, except maybe for Jack Campbell. I didn't think the Rangers would use the buyout window. I didn't think the Bruins would use their buyout window. I didn't think the Wild or Yotes would use their buyout window. I thought the Penguins would use their buyout window, but then they made the Karlsson trade, so using the buyout window didn't really make sense for them. And then I thought that the Ducks would definitely consider it, but with Lundstrom now injured, I think they were most likely going to keep the forwards that were on expiring deals for them. So I don't find it too surprising that none of those teams wound up using their buyout window, but I do find it a little bit surprising in a sense. So going to be interesting to see, but no more buyouts for the rest of the season, and all of the buyout windows for these teams who had arbitration cases are now closed. So that's definitely interesting to see, and we'll have to wait until next year to see some more buyouts happen. But that's the buyout update we're going to talk about for today. And next we go over to the trade rumor part of the video. Now, as we talked about, on Sunday we had a huge trade between the Sharks, the Penguins, and the Canadiens that sent Erik Karlsson to Pittsburgh to become a Pittsburgh Penguin. You know that Karlsson was a favorite to go to Pittsburgh for a long time. We know that Pittsburgh have been in the Karlsson sweepstakes ever since the start of free agency. The start of free agency, it sounded like Seattle and Carolina were also in there. Then it sounded like Seattle sort of trailed off after a couple of days. Canes were in there for quite a while, but then they signed Aho to his long-term extension, brought in Tony DeAngelo. It sounded like they were out on Karlsson, so it basically sounded like it was either Penguins or bust, or maybe there was a surprise team in there as well. But it wound up being that Karlsson went to Pittsburgh. So I think that's a really good move for the Penguins. But there's definitely going to be some other ramifications off that trade. So, like I said, I already did a separate video talking about the Karlsson trade, going into detail about that. You can check that out on my channel. But there's definitely going to be some other important ramifications on this. So hopefully, because Karlsson was the biggest name on the board, now that Karlsson's gone, with this trade now taking place, some of these other moves that we thought would be coming start to open up. Maybe there's a couple more trades before the season starts. Maybe there's a couple signings before the season starts. So hopefully, with Karlsson now off the board, tension shifts elsewhere, and hopefully we get some more action before the season starts. But we're going to talk about a couple of trade rumors here. First, we'll talk about the Montreal Canadiens. Now, the Canadiens came away in this trade with a pretty good package. They were able to get rid of 2 forward contracts, and Mike Hoffman and Rem Pitlick. Pitlick was going to be a bottom 6 forward who might have been placed on waivers. Hoffman, they were trying to look for a trade for an extremely long period of time, but they were able to find a trade for him. So they moved 2 forwards. That was a huge win for them. They get a prospect in Nathan Laguerre. They get a second-round pick in the 2025 draft. They also got Jeff Petry with 25% of his contract retained, and Casey DeSmith. Now, I want to talk about the possibility of the Canadiens flipping Jeff Petry. Plus, there's also some talk that the Canadiens could wind up moving a goaltender. Now, once they acquire Casey DeSmith, he's a good backup goaltender. He was playing with the Penguins this past couple of seasons, backing up Jerry. He's actually put up some pretty good numbers. Last year was a bit of a down year for him, but he played more of the games than he had the past couple of years. And he definitely looked like a really good goaltender. But after signing guys like Nedeljkovic and Hellberg, it seemed a lot likely like the DeSmith was going to be moved out by the Penguins. So I don't think it's too much of a surprise that DeSmith was moved, but I do think it was a bit of a surprise that the Canadiens were the team who wound up acquiring him, as they do still have some pretty good goaltending depth within their team. Kane Primo, who's the goalie of the future, is now waivers eligible, so it's quite likely that he could make the team this year. You also have Sam Montembeault, who did quite well last year as the Canadian starter in a tandem with Jake Allen. Allen's starting the first year of his 2-year contract extension. He's looked pretty good in a tandem. And now you add Casey Smith. So you have 4 goaltenders who could be NHL caliber this year. So it's quite likely that one of those guys could be moved. Now, there's still a lot of goaltenders in the market, so I'm not exactly sure which teams would be really interested in acquiring one of these guys, because you still have guys like Connor Hellebuyck on the market, John Gibson, Dan Vladar. There's a couple of other options in the goaltending market as well, so there's going to be a couple of possible goaltender trades before the season starts, and I do think the Canadiens could possibly make one of those moves. They have Jake Allen, who I think could be a trade option. I think the team would rather to keep Montembeault, but he's entering the final year of his deal. He has a $1 million cap hit. It's quite possible with his good value that they could move him. I think they would rather keep him, but I think it's possible they move him. DeSmith is also in the final year of their contract. It would not surprise me at all if they flipped him, or if they possibly placed him on waivers and sent him down to the minors as their third stringer. I think the most likely possibility in my eyes would be them trying to find a new home for Jake Allen, and then possibly move DeSmith down to the minors, place him on waivers, hopefully he clears, have him be their third stringer, and then run with the Primo and Montembeault tandem, see if Primo's ready for the NHL roster. So I think that's possibly the most likely. I could see DeSmith be moved, I could see Allen be moved. I think it's a little bit less likely that Montembeault's moved, because I think the Canadiens would really like him, and he's actually done quite well. I'm not sure that Primo is ready to be the goalie of the future yet. I know that there's a lot of talk that the Canadiens aren't as high on Primo as they once were, so it's quite possible that they could maybe consider moving him on waivers and hoping that no one takes him, but it's going to be interesting to see. So I definitely think it's quite likely that we see Canadiens move at the very least one goaltender. Maybe they move one on waivers too before the season starts. I think the most likely option is Allen. He has 2 years left, a $3.85 million cap hit. He's a decent tandem goaltender. He can be a 1A, he can be a 1B. For a team who has a younger team who's looking to hopefully push for a playoff spot, maybe like a Buffalo comes to mind. We know that they could use the goaltender. Maybe they try and flip Eric Comrie, who could definitely be placed on waivers, to Montreal for Allen. Maybe they try and go for like a Allen and Levi tandem. I think that could be a possibility. Maybe the Blackhawks, who don't really have a really great NHL tandem at the NHL level right now. They do have a younger team. They want to try and get at least a couple more wins to help Connor Bedard. Maybe they could be a landing spot for a guy like Allen. So going to be interesting to see. There's not a whole bunch of options for goalies to land right now, but I think a team like a Buffalo or a Chicago could be a perfect landing spot for a guy like Jake Allen should he be traded. But in my opinion, I think the most likely scenario for the Canadiens on the goaltending side would be they move DeSmith down via waivers, they run with the Primo Montembeault tandem this year, and they try and find a home for Jake Allen. But I think it's also quite likely that they could move maybe possibly DeSmith, or possibly even Kane Primo. So it's going to be interesting to see. As for Petry, there's a lot of talk out there right now that Petry could be dealt at some point, possibly before the season starts. He has a $4.6 million cap hit after the Penguins retained on his salary. So if the Canadiens were to retain 50% of his salary, they could knock that cap hit down to $2.3 million, and then they could flip him to another team. I've heard the Stars be mentioned, as well as the Nashville Predators, and possible landing spots for Petry. Petry is a good solid top for the defenseman, so I'm not sure if the Preds will be the best option, given the fact they already have 4 right-shot defensemen in Carrier, Fabro, Chen, and Barry, who are all really solid right-shot defensemen, so I'm not sure if acquiring Petry would make the most sense for them. The Stars, I do think, could use top 4 right-shot defensemen, and they have been linked to Petry in the past, so I do see the fit with Dallas, and if Dallas can make that work cap-wise, I think Dallas could definitely be an option for them. It also wouldn't surprise me if a team like maybe a Florida could be of interest, given the fact they could probably still use some more defensive help. So it's going to be interesting to see, but I definitely do expect the Canadiens to possibly move Petry. I wouldn't say it's a guarantee, given the fact of how hard it was for the Penguins to move Petry, but I definitely think with the retained salary and the possibility of moving him for only $2.3 million, still being a solid second, third pair defenseman, I think there would be some teams interested. So keep your eye on the Canadiens, possibly moving a goaltender, and possibly flipping Petry, being the Nostradamus in the future. Going over to the San Jose Sharks, could the Sharks move a forward? Now, we talked about how the Sharks really didn't do well in this trade, in my opinion. They only got first-round pick back for a Norris Trophy winner in Karlsson. I know they got a lot of cap space back that will really help them in the next, not in the next couple of years, but in year 3 and 4 of Karlsson's contract. That will be a really big help to them. but I definitely do think they could have tried to get a little bit more out of that trade. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Sharks do going forward, but I think there's quite a likely possibility that the Sharks move a forward and possibly try and get another top four defenseman before the season starts. There was talk a little while ago that we talked about that there was a possible trade in place for sometime in September that would send Tyler Myers to San Jose in exchange for Kevin Labanc. With the abundance of forwards the Sharks now have after getting Hoffman and Granlund, I think that is a very likely possible trade from the Sharks' perspective. They have a hole on the right side in the top four. They could use Myers for the upcoming season and then flip him at the deadline, hopefully with some retained salary if they don't use all their salary slots up. And they have an abundance of forwards, so moving Labanc will definitely open up another roster spot, as I think this team will most likely want to give an opportunity to some of their younger players, like a Bordelot or a Eklund. So I think it's very likely that that trade could happen. Now the Canucks will have to probably move out of forward of their own before they acquire Kevin Labanc. But I think it's extremely likely that that sort of a trade will extremely work for the Sharks. Beyond Labanc, for a possible Labanc-Myers trade, I could see the Sharks maybe move a couple of other guys. They have Alex Barabanov, who's on his final year of his contract at a $2.5 million cap hit. He's a solid middle six forward on most teams, so I could see the Sharks try and move him. I don't expect them to move Hoffman or Granlund until they play some more and they show that they can still be really good NHL forwards. So I think Barabanov could be a possible trade option. Labanc could be a possible trade option. Possibly Logan Couture. I've heard his name mentioned a couple of times. Couture's a really solid top six center. He signed for the next couple of seasons. A really high $8 million cap hit. So I'm not sure the Sharks would really want to retain, given the fact they've already retained on Burns and Karlsson. And if they retain on Couture, their retained salary slots are locked up long term for until those three contracts expire. So I'm not sure they'll really want to retain on Couture, but I definitely do think it's possible that the Sharks do wind up moving a forward. So whether that's moving Labanc to bring in a guy like Tyler Myers or possibly moving Barabanov for Couture, I think they have to move at least one player off the forward group to start the season, because I definitely think it's extremely likely that this team wants to get some more youth into their lineup and to see if they can have guys like Eklund and Bordelot play consistent top 9 minutes this year. I think if they want those two to play consistent top 9 minutes, they have to move a guy like Labanc or Barabanov, or possibly even Couture. So going interesting to see, but I would not be shocked if the Sharks were not done and they were to move a forward before the season starts, so definitely keep your eye on that. With the Washington Capitals, there's been a couple of reports I've seen over the past little while that have said that Caps GM Brian McClellan said that he would not be too shocked if he did make maybe one more move before the season started, and it does sound like they're trying to still acquire a top six forward. Now we know that the Capitals are still a team who's looking to try and make the playoffs. Now they are in a really crowded Metro and Eastern Conference. Like at this point in time, I would probably put Pittsburgh, now they've acquired Karlsson, the Rangers, the Canes, the Devils, maybe even the Islanders ahead of the Capitals right now. And I would also say that there's a ton of teams in the Atlantic Division who would be ahead of them. So at this point in time, I'm not sure if the Capitals will be able to make the playoffs, just given the fact that there are so many good teams in that Eastern Conference right now. But it seems like they're trying to get some top six help to try and improve their chances. Now it sounds like they're still trying to move on from a couple of players, including Evgeny Kuznetsov and Anthony Mantha. Mantha's entering the final year of his deal with a $5.7 million cap hit. Kuznetsov, I think, has 2 years, maybe 3 years left on his deal at a $7.9 million cap hit. So both those guys were rumored to be trade baits going into the offseason. Neither one has been moved. So I think if they were to try and acquire a top six forward, they would have to move on from Kuznetsov. I think they could definitely try and get maybe like a second line center or a top six winger. I think it's quite likely. There's definitely some options out there for possible trade options. I've heard a lot of options for possible players who could be available for trade still. So I think there's quite a likely possibility that the Capitals try and move Kuznetsov in a trade to bring in either a second line center who can help replace Kuznetsov, be more of a consistent second line center than Kuznetsov was last year, or either a top six winger who can play with a guy like maybe Ovechkin or Strome or Backstrom or someone there who can really help that team on the wing. So I definitely think it's really likely that we see some sort of a trade involving the Capitals still at this point in time. Not exactly sure what teams would be involved. There's still a couple of teams I could see out there moving a forward if they could get their hands on a top second line center like a Evgeny Kuznetsov. So it would not surprise me at all if there was a trade still in the works there for the Capitals. But it's going to be interesting to see, as I think that the Capitals would not surprise me at all if they moved one of Kuznetsov or Mantha to try and improve that top six. So going to be interesting to see, but I think the Capitals are not done yet, and it's quite a likely possibility that they could try and acquire a top six forward before the season starts. And lastly, here we go over to the Calgary Flames. Like I said, now that Karlsson's traded, hopefully some of these other situations that were rumored to possibly be happening start to get moved forward, and these situations get done. Like we said, Boston, could they still try and acquire a center if it's feasible for them? Could some of these other things happen that still haven't happened? Like, we've gotten a couple of free agents. Could some of these other guys start to get moved? Like we said, Caps still have some rumors. Canadians, Sharks, there's a whole bunch of other teams who could still make trades. And one of the other ones is Noah Hanafin in Calgary. Now, there's a lot of talk last week when I was talking about Karlsson that maybe Hanafin would be the Flames' backup option. Obviously, they did go with Karlsson, so they're not in the Hanafin conversation anymore. But teams who missed out on Karlsson, I think, will now turn their attention to Hanafin. There's still a couple of teams out there who could use a top four defenseman, such as a Noah Hanafin. I know earlier in the season there was some link to Dallas, as Dallas could use a top four defenseman. I've seen the Blues possibly looking to move defensemen and try and shake up the roster. Maybe they could try and add a guy like Noah Hanafin. I know that Seattle was in on Erik Karlsson. Maybe they could try and use a guy like Noah Hanafin. If Vancouver moves a guy like Tyler Myers, I could see them being in the market for maybe a top four defenseman. I think Hanafin could be an option there. In the East, you got a team like Buffalo, who I think could definitely use an upgrade at the defensive position still. They could use a guy like Hanafin. Florida could still use an upgrade at the defensive end, especially with guys like Ekblad and Montour out for the start of the season. I think they could use a guy like Hanafin. I think there's still a handful of teams out there who could definitely use a top four defenseman upgrade in their system. So it would not surprise me at all if we saw a Hanafin trade in the next couple of weeks before the season starts. As like I said, Hanafin has said that he's not going to sign with the Flames. He said that he's going to go to free agency next year. He wants to go back to the U.S. We know that the Flames are not going to be able to sign him, maybe not even sign Lindholm, and the Flames cannot go into this season with Lindholm and Hanafin unsigned. So if those two are still not signed and would be free agents at the end of next year before the season starts, I highly expect those two to be traded. So with Karlsson now gone, I expect all the focus on the defensive end for teams still looking for a top four defenseman to shift to Hanafin. So going to be interesting to see, but I definitely expect Hanafin possibly in the next couple of weeks to be dealt, and I expect talks to pick up on Hanafin, as I think that situation is going to be the next big one to watch as we are now finished with Karlsson. So definitely interesting to see. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments on what all you think about all those discussed today. Do the Caps wind up making a move to move Kuznetsov or Mantha and acquire themselves another top six forward, whether it be a top six winger or a second line center? Are the Sharks able to move a forward, whether that be Couture or LeBanc or Barabanov or someone else before the season starts, to free up a roster spot to give some of their younger players like Eklund or Bordelot? Do the Canadians move a goaltender? Is Allen the most likely option, or do you think it's more likely that Smith or Primo get moved? And do you think Petry gets moved at a retained cap hit by the Canadians? And do you see the Flames moving Hanafin before the season starts? And if so, where do you think the most likely landing spot for him would be? I would say probably Seattle, Buffalo, maybe Dallas, or Florida. So going to be interesting to see, but definitely I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. But that's all I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video, and if you really liked it, remember to subscribe down below. I also do a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so definitely check that out. I have a link down in the description below, and I can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.